Darling? I asked. Are you sleeping? Amy shook her head and muttered something unintelligible. May I ask you a question? I took this as an agreement. Can you tell me, after almost 25 years of marriage, why your skills in fondling my manhood have suddenly improved? Still half asleep, Amy grumbled. I always did this for you. I watched Amy. She was relaxed and curled up with her back turned to me. She hugged her extra pillow. Yes, you did. You did it as foreplay, but you never really enjoyed it. Why such a sudden change? Amy rolled over, still clutching her pillow tightly. She flashed her sexy blue eyes at me, smiled widely, and said in a flirtatious voice, I didn't hear you complaining. I smiled back at Amy, my best friend, and the woman I had adored since we met at a summer backyard party over 2 decades ago. And now I'm not complaining. I'm just wondering why your behavior on this matter has changed. Amy woke up and asked, What's your problem, Chris? I'm just asking a simple question, Amy. For 25 years, you did this without much enthusiasm. It was routine work at best. Amy sat up on the bed, and I continued, And tonight you did something you've never done before. I'm just wondering where this sudden enthusiasm comes from. Amy climbed out of bed and stood with her hands on her hips and stared at me. We can go back to the old way, if that's what you prefer. Amy was angry, and I suspected she would be even angrier. No, I like your new skills. I wanted to get into it, so I continued. You're almost as good as some of my old college girlfriends. Amy's face turned red with anger, but before she could comment, I said, But you still haven't answered my question. Why have your skills improved? Have you read an article, or had intimate conversations with your girlfriends, or perhaps had some practical training? What the hell are you accusing me of? Amy was furious. I calmly told her, I didn't accuse you of anything. I'm just looking for an explanation. You hated doing this throughout our entire relationship, and suddenly, it gives you pleasure. I'm wondering why. Amy grabbed her pillow, headed for the door, and as she walked out of the bedroom, she angrily shouted, You don't have to rack your pathetic brain over this anymore, because I'm never doing this again. Amy was halfway down the hallway, heading toward our guest room, when I said from our open bedroom door, I guess it won't matter if you tell me the truth tonight. I'll find out tomorrow. What the hell is that supposed to mean? This means, I told her slowly, that the private investigator I hired almost 6 weeks ago has completed his report. I'm meeting him in the morning. I suspect your new and improved skills will feature prominently in the report. As I closed and locked the bedroom door, I saw Amy's jaw drop. Amy's knocking, sobbing, and pleading continued for over an hour as I lay in our double bed crying into my pillow. Amy and I get up early. Since I didn't want to talk to her, I set the alarm for 3 in the morning. I got dressed in sports clothes and left the house within 5 minutes. My workout that morning lasted 2 hours, and I was exhausted. I took a shower and got dressed in the clothes that I had put in my car the day before. I settled into a table at my favorite breakfast place just before 6. I was 2 blocks from my office. After I ordered my coffee, I turned on my phone and was immediately bombarded with text messages and voicemail notifications from my slut wife. I ignored the messages and texted my boss, Can you meet me at Lucy's before work? Do not rush. 30 minutes later, I received, Of course, at 7:30, Stacy flew into Lucy's, looked around, and, noticing me, plopped down on the bench opposite. She ordered coffee and a bagel to go, and then looked at me. Stacy's eyes widened, and she said, You look like crap. Yes, I look like crap and feel even worse. Is there any shit at work that I need to know about? I shook my head and felt Stacy relax before she even finished her question. No, it's personal. I'm convinced Amy is cheating on me. She almost confirmed it last night. This morning I'm meeting with the private investigator I hired. His report is ready, and I will find out all the unpleasant details. I just want to warn you that I will be sneaking in and out of the office while I sort out this mess. Stacy sat silently and collected her thoughts. Finally, she asked, How can I help? If you don't have a wand, I'm not sure you can do much. I will take the next 2 days off, but will remain in constant contact with the office. This will help me get through until the weekend. I'm going to stay away from Amy for a while. I'm meeting with my private investigator this morning and my lawyer tomorrow morning. In conclusion, I shrugged my shoulders. Don't you think you're getting ahead of yourself? Unless you're not telling me something, have you seen any evidence? Last night, I provoked an argument about sex. Amy quickly became heated and ran out of the bedroom. I told her she didn't need to answer my questions. My private investigator would answer them in the morning. If you had seen the look on Amy's face, you would have been 100% sure of what the report would say. You need to talk to her, Chris. I know. I will do so, but not now. Where did you stop? Asked Stacy. I'll rent a room. Stacy began rummaging through her suitcase-sized purse and finally pulled out a set of keys. Taking the key off the ring, she said, "Here is the key to our cottage. You were there. It's only 35 minutes away. We won't be using it until the end of the month." Handing me the key, she asked, "Can I give you some advice?" "Certainly. If everything goes as you expect, your life will get worse before it gets better. Life will be crap for a while, and then one day you'll wake up and not feel like crap at all. You'll just be miserable. This will be the start of your recovery." You seem to be speaking from experience. My ex divorced me 12 years ago. It was cruel. We took a sip of coffee, and Stacy continued. I don't talk about it much, mainly because I'm embarrassed. I ruined my life, my child's life, and Tom's life. His family despises me. My son's friends hit on me because they know I'm a slut. I interjected, "You don't have to tell me things like that, Stacy. I know. Even after 2 years of weekly therapy sessions, I still have more questions about my idiotic behavior than answers." Each of us smiled sadly. Stacy continued, "Tom found out about my infidelity in the worst possible way. He tested positive for sexually transmitted diseases. I infected my husband and best friend." I was at a loss for words, so she continued, "It's only getting worse, if that's even possible." I panicked and blamed Tom, saying that he was the one who infected me. We both knew, hell, everyone knew I was a cheater. "Why did you do that?" Stacy stared at the tabletop and admitted, "Because I could. Because I wanted to feel sexy again. Because I wanted to have a nasty secret. Because I liked illegal, anonymous, rough sex." She explained, "I travel on business just like you. Once or twice a year, I met an interesting man and invited him to my room. Looking back, it seems so stupid." The silence continued until Stacy asked, "Have you ever cheated?" "No. To be honest, I have never given in to temptation. Do not get me wrong, I am not an angel. I like to flirt and I like to know that women find me attractive, but I never thought about betraying Amy." "Why do you think this is so?" "It's just how I'm built. Sex with Amy was pretty vanilla. She doesn't like to experiment. But a regular date with Amy is always better than the kinkiest one-night stand in college." "What made you suspicious?" "Amy and I have always had an active sex life. Even after 25 years, we still get naked 2 or 3 times a week. Over the past few months, Amy has become a little more aggressive, a little more adventurous, a little more—" I shrugged again. A couple of months later, with a growing lump in my stomach, I hired a private detective. I'll know the results in a couple of hours. I bet Amy will call the office looking for you. What should we tell her? Tell her that I'm taking a short vacation and won't be back at the office until next week. Stacy paid our bill along with her bagel. She leaned over, hugged me tightly, and said, "Hold on. Let me know if there is anything I can do for you." Our daughters, Julie and Kate, were juniors at the University of Connecticut. Julie was exactly 9 months older than her sister. Kate was allowed to skip 4th grade and ended up graduating from high school in the same class as her older sister. Julia followed in my footsteps and majored in electrical engineering. Kate majored in chemistry and planned a career in medicine. Earlier that day, I was able to reach Kate on her cell phone, telling her that I needed to speak with her and her sister later that afternoon, and asking that they not contact their mom until we, let's talk. "Dad, What the hell is going on? Mom has called each of us a dozen times and must know that we are dodging her calls. I kissed Kate on the cheek, hugged Julie, and led them to a table in a quiet corner of the UC Student Union. "You look like crap, Dad," Julie said. For the first time in weeks, I laughed heartily as I realized those were exactly the words my boss had said earlier in the day. "Yes, you're not the first to notice this." It was Kate's turn, and she said, "Just tell us, Dad." "We worry. What's happening?" I rehearsed in my head how to answer this question, but was at a loss for words when it came time to speak. Instead, the sobs that I'd been holding in since I met with my private detective came out in a fountain of tears. Both girls jumped out of their chairs and ran into my arms. My girls held me tightly until I was able to get my very strong emotions under control. "Sorry that I have to tell you this, but I will file for divorce from my mother. She has a long, ongoing affair with a colleague." Julie began. "But Dad, you—" She couldn't finish her thought. "Yeah, baby, I'm sure. I have proof." Julie's jaw dropped, and Kate began to cry. Julie spoke next. "Dad, I want to see the evidence. I know you're not lying, but I need to see this. Earlier in the day, I took one photo that was horrifying, but one of the least offensive, and separated it from the rest of the private investigator's report. I pulled out a photo of their mom and Mike Brooks leaving the house their real estate firm was trying to sell. Michael and Amy stood on the porch and kissed. The girls looked at the photo together, and Julie began. "Dad." "Honey," I interrupted. "I have photos, videos, text messages, and emails. I will never show this to any of you, but I saw them. They are awful." At this moment, both girls were crying. Kate asked through tears, "Are you really going to divorce your mom?" "Girls, at the moment I don't see an alternative. I know I have never been a perfect husband or father." I shrugged off their protests and continued, "But I tried to do the right thing. Most of the time I was successful, but sometimes I was wrong. My mistakes were never intentional, and I always corrected them immediately. I have invested everything I have into my marriage and family. I have nothing more to give, and it seems like Mom needs more." The girls stopped crying and listened carefully to my words. "I still love your mother, although not as much as I did 6 weeks ago when I became suspicious. But I don't really like her. I certainly don't trust her, and I can't imagine ever being able to trust her again. The worst thing for me is that I have lost your mother's respect. She humiliated me in the worst ways possible, and she didn't care." The brief silence was broken by Julie's cell phone ringing. We looked at the phone screen and saw Mom. Looking at Julie, I said, "Don't—" Before I could say anything else, Julie grabbed her phone and angrily replied, "Sorry, Mom, but Kate and I don't have time for you. We console our grief-stricken father. If you need someone to talk to, too, just call your sex buddy." We could all hear Amy screaming hysterically as Julie hung up. When the phone rang again, Julie immediately turned it off and Katie followed suit. "I'm sorry you find yourself in the middle of this terrible mess. Your mom—" "Okay. She's still your mom. She loves you and you know it. I expect things to be rocky between you and Mom, at least for a while, but I also expect you to treat her with the respect she deserves." When the girls started protesting, I raised my hand. "I'm not asking you to accept her infidelity or the irreparable damage it has caused to our wonderful family, but we will all have to learn to live with it." I looked from one of my girls to the other and continued. "She is your mother, and you need to accept and love her, warts and all, just like you need to accept me, in the same way." After leaving the UC campus, I stopped at a burger joint for a bite and a well-deserved craft beer, then headed to my parents' house. I rarely visit my parents unannounced, and as I was sitting in their driveway gathering my thoughts, I saw their front door swing open. Dad went out onto the porch, and Mom followed on his heels. They watched me together while I sat in my car. I gathered my courage and got out of the car, and as I started to walk up the path in front of the house, Dad walked towards me. Dad and I met halfway, and he wrapped me in a big bear hug. The strength that I tried to muster left me, and I unashamedly burst into tears into my father's shoulder. Your mom and I don't know what's going on, but Amy's frantic phone calls alerted us to the fact that there was a problem. We expected you to show up this evening. After I told my parents about Amy's affair with her coworker, my mother asked, "Do you think counseling could help you deal with this problem?" My mother was always an optimist, and in truth, she considered Amy her daughter. Tears streamed down her cheeks as I shook my head and said, "I have no desire to see a psychologist. I'm not perfect, but I treated Amy and the girls like queens. I didn't do anything wrong, and I don't deserve the cruel, disgusting treatment that Amy showed me." "But you spent so many wonderful years together." Sighing, I admitted, "You're right, Mom. We had a wonderful life together until Amy, and only Amy, ruined this perfect life and family. This wasn't a one-night stand. It's a love affair between two selfish married people who don't care about anyone but themselves." I could tell the wheels in Mom's brain were turning madly as she tried to think of a different approach. I think I stunted my mother when I asked, "Why do you want me to be miserable living with a lying, cheating whore?" Like I said, I'm not perfect, but I hope we can all agree that I deserve better than to live with a cheating slut. "Please, Chris," my mother begged, "don't call Amy such dirty names, at least not in front of me." "I was trying to get my point across, Mom. Amy has happily accepted everything I can give, but it's not enough. She took much more and, in the process, humiliated and disrespected me. I'll ask again, don't I deserve better?" Dad interrupted her and said, "Give Mom a break. We are trying to make sense of what is still a shock. You know that your mom and I will support you in any decision you make." Dad waited a few seconds before continuing, "And you must understand if this is possible. We would like to continue our relationship with Amy and her family. It certainly won't be as strong as what we have now, but I pray Amy's activities don't stop that from happening." When Dad finished, Mom's cell phone rang. Mom looked at the screen and said, "This is Amy." After thinking for a second, Mom looked me in the eye and said, "I won't avoid Amy's calls, and I won't lie to her. I will never ask you for this." Dad and I sat in silence while Mom answered the call. "Hello, Amy. He arrived here 10 minutes ago and told us about your behavior. I suppose he'll stay here for the night." "Now! Now!" "Sorry, Chris. Amy is on her way." "Don't worry about it, Mom. I'm going to go. I'll call you in the morning." Mom asked, "Where are you going?" "Stacy has a family cottage on Lake Cooper. She allows me to use it for a short time." "Eventually, you'll have to talk to her," Dad said. "I'll talk, but I'm going to do it on my time, not hers. I'm just not ready." "What should we tell Amy when she arrives?" Mom wanted to know. "I would call her and tell her that she's going in vain. Tell her I'm not ready to talk to her. I know you won't lie, but I expect you not to tell her where I'm staying." Mom started crying. I walked around the table and hugged her tightly. Dad joined us, and the Harrington family consoled each other. My mom and Dad silently gave me all the emotional support I needed. After officially starting the divorce process with a visit to a highly recommended divorce lawyer, I headed to my mother-in-law's house. Amy's car wasn't in the driveway, so I parked and headed to the front door. "This is really bad, isn't it?" These were the first words of greeting when Frank Wilson opened the front door. It can't get any worse. Frank stood in the middle of the doorway, blocking my entrance, and asked, "Who cheated?" "She did it." "Do you have evidence?" Frank wanted to know. When I nodded, Frank yelled, "Damn!" and turned, leaving the door open, and went into the kitchen. Eileen, Amy's mother, sat restlessly at the kitchen table. When I entered, she raised her head and, pointing to the coffee maker on the counter, said, "The coffee is fresh." While I silently poured a cup, Frank pulled out a bottle of Jack from the kitchen cabinet. We sat down and Frank added a couple shots of bourbon to his coffee and slid the bottle across the table towards me. As I poured some courage into my cup, Frank asked, "Can I see the evidence?" Staring at the kitchen table, I told him, "I'll let you see the written report, but I won't show you any photographs or videos." I looked up when he swore again and, looking him in the eyes, continued, "But Frank, I beg you, don't ask to see the photographs." No father should ever see his daughter do what is shown in the photographs. It was sad to see, but Frank collapsed in front of Eileen and I. Eileen intervened and asked, "Is there any hope that your marriage will survive?" "I met with the lawyer earlier this morning. He will complete the paperwork early next week and file the papers in court on Wednesday. The lawyer has Amy's cell number and will call her. She will have the opportunity to pick up the documents at his office, or we can serve her officially." "I can't believe you're ruining your marriage with such disregard." Eileen had a flash of anger. "I'm not destroying anything, Eileen. It's Amy's fault. She left me." "But it was only once," Eileen screamed. I took 3 deep breaths to calm myself and momentarily regretted the bourbon I'd put in my coffee. This happened more than once. This didn't happen twice. Only Amy and her kinky sex buddy know exactly how many times they've dated, but their romance has been going on for months. We were all silent for a few moments before I continued. "This is the second marriage for each of you. You both ended your first marriages due to infidelity." Frank quickly replied, "But our marriages were new. Yours has been going on for 25 years. Surely that must mean something. Love, trust, and respect. Frank." You've said these words to me hundreds of times over the years. A marriage should have equal parts love, trust, and respect. I don't trust Amy, and she sure as hell doesn't respect me. Eileen wanted to know, will you be fair to Amy in the divorce? According to divorce laws, I have no choice. But you know me. I'm not going to make this any more difficult for Amy and our family than it needs to be. What about the girls? Frank wanted to know. Yesterday afternoon, I was on campus and we talked. The girls know that I am filing for divorce, and they know the reason. They're not happy with Amy, but I don't think anyone is happy with her. It may take a little time, but they will come to their senses. I promise. I have no right to ask. I interrupted Eileen and said, "You can ask me anything. I'm divorcing Amy. I have no intention of divorcing you and Frank, and I hope that we can continue our friendship and relationship." Tears flowed from Eileen's eyes as she asked, "Please talk to Amy." "I will do so, I promise. But I'm not going to talk to her today, and probably not for the next few days. But I will talk to her." Mary Beth Johnston was Amy's close friend for many years. Their relationship could have been closer, but I've been wary of Mary Beth and her husband Phil since we met. Mary Beth and Phil had an open marriage. Although they did not actively involve singles and couples in their chosen lifestyle, they were not secretive either. They often told 21-plus rated stories about their X-rated activities. There were a few occasions over the years when Amy's interest in swingers parties and friends with benefits relationships made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. But in the end, I trusted my wife completely. "I can't believe you treat Amy like that." "Yes, she made a huge mistake, but she's sorry. You need to put on your big boy pants and get over it. Go and have sex with some chick if you want, but don't do anything stupid." That was Mary Beth's opening salvo as she plopped down on the chair across from me in the restaurant. "I'm not going to do anything stupid, I promise." Mary Beth looked at me doubtfully and said, "Amy was under the impression that you were seeking a divorce." "I'm seeking a divorce. The documents will be submitted on Wednesday. Filing for divorce is not stupid. This is what normal people do when they want to get rid of their lying, cheating slut wife." Before Mary Beth could continue, I asked, "You've known me almost as long as Amy has known me. I knew all this time about your open marriage. When did I give any indication that I would accept an open marriage or an unfaithful wife?" Mary Beth was stunned and said, not addressing anyone, "This is such a nightmare." My immediate response was, "This is a nightmare. This is a nightmare for Amy, for me, our children, family, and friends. Mary Beth, this is about to become a nightmare for you and Phil, too." Coming to her senses, Mary Beth snapped, "Of course, this is a nightmare for Phil and me. We have all been friends for many years." I simply smirked at Mary Beth as my threat went over her head. "What?" she asked. What followed was excitement. What? I had a private detective who was investigating Amy's suspicious behavior. Continuing to advance, Mary Beth replied, "Yes. So what?" He caught her cheating. The private investigator's report lists the contents of all text messages between you and Amy over the past 6 months. Mary Beth was trying to process the information when I said, "I know Mike was a member of your swingers group before he got married. I know you told Amy he has a big man tool. When you found out he was working with Amy, you told her to have sex with him. I know Amy has been keeping you posted on their weekly dates. I know every fucking nasty detail, you pathetic bitch." Mary Beth jumped up and said, "Listen, Chris." Before she could continue, I said, "Every action has a consequence. The consequence of Amy's infidelity is divorce. The consequences for you and Phil won't be as bad, but I'm going to do everything I can to ruin your life." "How the hell are you going to do that, asshole?" Smiling for the first time, I said, "I'm glad you asked." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I pointedly unfolded it and said, "I'm going to send this email to several people you and Phil know." Mary Beth reached across the table and snatched the paper from my hands. She read, "Topic: Mary Beth and Phil Johnston ruined my marriage. Friends, my name is Chris Harrington. I have been married to Amy Harrington for almost 25 years. Except for the last few months, my marriage has been perfect, at least for me. Due to the direct impact of Mary Beth and Phil Johnston's open marriage, my wife cheated on me, and I am filing for divorce. A 25-year marriage was flushed down the toilet. I am writing this letter as a warning so that other marriages will not be ruined by Mary Beth and Phil's cavalier attitude towards marital fidelity. My wife cheated with a swinger friend of Phil and Mary Beth. Mary Beth encouraged the relationship and told my wife Amy that she would never forget it. Mary Beth is right. My wife will never forget her affair because it led to the breakdown of our marriage and the destruction of our family. Whether you have a personal, business, or social relationship with the Johnstons, please be aware of their complete disregard for marriage vows and their willingness to sabotage your marriage. Perhaps if I had chosen our friends more carefully, Amy and I would not have gotten divorced. Sincerely, Chris Harrington." Mary Beth hissed, "You bastard. We will sue you if you send this to anyone." I chuckled and replied, "My lawyer reviewed the email and text messages from the private investigator's report. He concluded that everything in the email was true." "Who the hell are you sending this to?" "I have an email list of every teacher and administrator in your school district, as well as members of the Board of Education. I have 38 names and email addresses of employees at Phil's company. Of course, there are over 300 people working there, but I suspect the email will be passed around. Members of your country club and church will receive a copy. There are several other organizations that you or Phil are involved with. They will also receive copies." Mary Beth sat with her mouth open. I told her, "You can keep this copy for yourself so Phil can see exactly what is being sent. Have a nice life, you disgusting piece of shit." As part of the private investigator's report, I was informed that Lucy Brooks, the wife of Michael Asshole Brooks, took her children to play at Willowbrook Park every Saturday morning. At the park, she and her children met with the usual group of mothers and babies. Recognizing me and my greeting, Lucy said, "Chris, I haven't seen you since the office holiday party. What a pleasant surprise." "Good to see you, Lucy." 7 mothers stared at me as I continued. "I admit that our meeting was not accidental. I hope we can talk privately for a few minutes." Lucy nodded happily and said, "Of course, certainly." But after a moment she noticed that my behavior did not correspond to her cheerful mood. She asked, "Chris, this is all—" She stopped and stared at me as the first glimmer of understanding appeared on her face. Lucy paled noticeably. Her friends' friendly faces showed either concern for Lucy or anger that I had somehow upset their friend. "Are you okay?" asked the plump blonde sitting next to her. Lucy did not immediately answer her friend and came out of a short trance only when the second mother sharply asked, "What's going on?" I'm fine. And to me, I guess we need a little privacy." "That would be best." There is a high probability that this will not happen. A slender and very attractive red-haired girl jumped to her feet, her angry gaze darting back and forth between Lucy and me. Chris, this is my overprotective older cousin, Aggie. Aggie, meet Chris Harrington. Chris's wife and Mike work together. I suspect Chris wants to talk to me about the female intuition issues you think I'm imagining. Ladies, Aggie, how about Lucy and I sit at the picnic table under the tree? I pointed to a place 15 meters away from us. This should give us the privacy we need without being too far away. Lucy stared blankly at the ground for several moments. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks as she began to rise to her feet. Aggie ran up to her cousin and hugged her tightly, and both women began to sob together. When they parted, Aggie's angry look turned to sadness when she saw my wet eyes. I told Aggie, I didn't just bring bad news. I'm stuck in the middle of this mess with your cousin. With Lucy by my side, we set off. After walking just a few steps, Lucy stopped, turned around and said, Aggie, will you take the children home with you? She replied, Of course, Lucy. If necessary, can they stay for the weekend? Aggie smiled sadly and nodded. Lucy and I were sitting across from each other at the picnic table, and I asked, How long have you known? Sighing, Lucy said, Unfortunately, this is not my first rodeo. We got married a little later than most and had children almost immediately. After our second child, Mike had a vasectomy. His first romance began 6 months later. The second began a year after our first skirmish. This is the third strike. I suspected things had gone wrong within a month. I'm struggling with the thought of divorcing Amy. I know this will be the end result, but I constantly doubt myself. Can you tell me why you stayed with Mike after his first 2 affairs? Mainly because of the children. Oh shit, this is entirely because of the children. I grew up raised by a divorced, angry mom and a dad who came over once a week. I didn't want this for my children. I still don't want to, but this is their future. Luckily, I have a strong family in the area and will get a lot of help. I guessed what Lucy's answer would be and nodded in understanding. I asked, Do you know why Mike cheats? It was Lucy's turn to nod. He takes pleasure in turning good girls into bad ones. I wasn't a virgin when we got married, but I was very naive when it came to sex. Mike was my lover and teacher. He had high expectations of me and rewarded me, mostly with incredible climaxes when I lived up to his expectations. I love being his slut, but I want it to be in a loving and faithful marriage. Lucy continued, Do you have proof? I pulled out a thick envelope and handed it to her. I would like to suggest that you give the evidence to your lawyer and not look at it. Mike and Amy are not very nice to us during most of their meetings. There's nothing there but a broken heart. What made you suspect Amy? I chuckled and said, Obviously, Mike had the same hopes for Amy. Like a good dog, she enjoyed the tricks she learned and shared them with me. While we were sitting here, I decided to stay at Aggie's house for the weekend. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you take me home so I can pack my things for a few days? Before I could agree, Lucy said, I have to warn you. Mike will be home. No offense, but I'm not worried about your asshole husband. I'm glad to take you home. Having agreed with Aggie, Lucy returned to me, and we headed to my car. The drive to her house was mostly silent. When we pulled out onto her street, she pointed to an SUV parked on the side of the road and said, Pull next to that truck. I did as I was told and watched as Lucy waved to the driver. She looked at me, pointed ahead, and said, This is a white Colonial, 5 houses down and to the left. As I pulled into the driveway, the SUV pulled up behind me. Mike was in the middle of the front lawn, pushing a lawnmower. Everything happened quickly. Mike waved to Lucy as she got out of my car. The 2 women quickly got out of the SUV. They squeezed Lucy between them and led her to the front door. A very large man walked behind the women. After they entered the house, the man stood in front of the entrance, protecting them. An older man got out of the SUV at the same time I was getting out of my car. He walked up with his hand outstretched and said, I'm Larry Green. Lucy is my daughter. I stood in the open front door of my car with my hands on the hood and looked across the car as Mike walked towards me. "Chris? Chris Harrington? What is Lucy doing to you?" Mike was visibly shaking and pale. "I met her in the park this morning. I had a package, a very large package, from my private investigator that I wanted to share with her." Before Mike could answer, Larry said, "You're a piece of shit, Mike. You were born a piece of crap, and you will die a piece of crap. You just lost the only useful and worthwhile part of your worthless life." "This is all bullshit," Mike yelled. He turned, ran to the front door, and shouted, "Stay out of my way, Georgie!" I guessed that Georgie was the giant who was now sitting on the top step of the landing by the front door. The man didn't move a muscle until Mike was ready to walk past him, and then with the grace of a cat, the man jumped to his feet and placed both hands on Mike's chest. A second later, Mike was lying flat on his back, the wind knocked out of him. Larry looked at me questioningly. I told him, "It looks like Mike slipped." Larry nodded and said, "Yes, that's what it was like for me." Eventually, Mike staggered to his feet. He turned and shouted, "It's all your wife's fault. She came for me. Everyone knows she's just a slut." "I can't argue with you, Mike. Amy is a slut, and she's not my problem anymore." I laughed sadly at Mike and was afraid that my emotions were about to fail me. I didn't want that asshole to see how hurt I was. At that very moment, Larry put his hand on my shoulder. He squeezed, and a stream of energy flowed into me. "You'll make a great couple, Mike. Amy knows you're a cheater, and you know the same about her. What do you think will come of this?" "I don't want this bitch." I laughed again and replied, "I think she's lucky. She already has enough problems to be saddled with an asshole like you." I reached out and shook Larry and told him, "This asshole is not worth my time or energy. I'm leaving. Take good care of Lucy. She seems like a wonderful woman." 2 weeks passed, Amy was charged, and her lawyer contacted mine. Life has returned to a new and miserable normal. When I checked my voicemail at lunch, I found a voicemail from my mother-in-law. "Hello, Chris. This is Eileen. I'm calling to remind you of your promise to arrange a conversation with Amy. I'd consider it a personal favor if you called her. Thank you. I love you." I gritted my teeth and dialed my home number with a sigh, knowing Amy would be at work. I left the following message. "Amy, this is Chris. I stayed at Stacy's family home on the lake. If you want to come over for lunch on Saturday, I'll make sandwiches. Can we talk? Meet me at the picnic table in the backyard at noon. Thanks for meeting with me, Chris. Lunch looks delicious. Thank you." Amy and I sat across from each other at a picnic table by the lake. Although she didn't have that glow that I've seen every day for the past 2 decades, Amy still looked good. "Good to see you, Amy. Thank you for coming." Amy looked around and replied, "It's so calm here." I agree. When I was thinking about new living conditions, my first thought was to move to an apartment in the city center, next to my office. I think I've changed my mind and have my eye on lakefront property in the area. I didn't want my comment to hurt Amy, but I could tell she was immediately devastated. "Amy, Amy interrupted me with a wave of her hand. Her eyes filled with tears as she said, "You don't need to apologize. I'm too sensitive." She looked up from the table and continued, "I'm so scared." Her statement hung in the air, and I watched her carefully as she collected her thoughts. "I've been scared before. Many times. New challenges at work often paralyzed me. The challenges of raising 2 smart, athletic, and beautiful girls scared the living daylights out of me. But you were always there for me. I had my team, and I knew that together we could conquer anything." Smiling, I remarked, "We did a good job, isn't it?" We smiled contentedly for a few minutes and ate our lunch. I filled Amy's half-empty glass and poured myself a second round of craft beer. I went to a psychoanalyst. Amy sighed and continued, "This is an incorrect description. Dr. Poplar is amazing, and she is helping me come to terms with the end of our marriage and move forward as a team." "I'm happy for you, Amy. I hope you get the answers you need. I promised myself over and over again that I wouldn't ask you about reconciliation. Everyone told me it was impossible, but I have to." I have to ask, is there a chance that you can forgive me and we can be together again? I took a deep breath and took a couple sips of beer. These are two different questions, Amy. I've been thinking about the forgiveness half of the question since we agreed to meet today. I promised myself that I would try to forgive you. After thinking, I continued, it will take some time, and I don't know if it's possible, but I'm going to try. I will be honest and tell you that if I forgive you, it will be for the sake of the girls, our family, and myself, rather than for your sake. After draining half the remaining beer, I finished, we will see each other often enough that I don't want to feel angry. But Amy, I'm not going to stop the divorce, and we're never going to get back together. Amy sniffled and nodded in understanding. She asked, if I need help? If I need to talk? Can I call you? I wanted to shout, no, you're a fucking slut. Instead, I reached into the refrigerator, grabbed more beer, and filled my glass. Having regained my composure, I suggested, are you satisfied with the compromise? Amy nodded hesitantly. I said, except in emergency cases, let's work through our lawyers until the divorce becomes final. After that, I will answer your calls. Our divorce was finalized 7 months later. I was sitting on the back porch of my new lakeside home on my first night as a free man. I was trying to decide whether I wanted the buzz of 2 high-alcohol drinks, the craft beer in the refrigerator next to my chair, or getting punched in the face by the bottle of bourbon on the table in front of me when my cell phone rang. I smiled when I saw who was calling and answered, hello, Amy. I'm really sad, and I need to talk to someone too. Stacy was right. One day, 5 years later, I woke up. The sky was a little bluer, and the birds were chirping a little louder. Life was getting better. Stacy has relocated to our corporate headquarters in Dallas and is currently the executive vice president of sales and marketing. She remained unmarried. Her children have grown up. After drinking a glass or two of wine, she admits that she still sometimes experiences the thrill of a steamy one-night stand. Julie graduated with honors from college and currently works as an engineer for a West Coast defense contractor. She is in a semi-serious relationship and is studying for her master's degree in the evenings. Julie has a great relationship with Amy and I and communicates with each of us weekly. We call Kate a mole because she has no privacy. After graduating from high school, she worked for a pharmaceutical company for 2 years and was then accepted into Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. She is engaged to another mole and a medical school student, and they spend their days and nights studying and taking classes. I talk to Kate weekly, but I initiate all calls. Kate rarely talks to her mother. My mom and dad are in surprisingly good health, considering they are getting older. They still live in the Hartford, Connecticut area, but due to the cold winters, they also have a tiny one-bedroom studio condo in Clearwater, Florida. They spend the cold months in Florida. Mom has a monthly Saturday lunch with Amy, but Dad rarely goes. Frank and Eileen are also doing well, although they each have several serious health problems. Frank and Eileen take turns dating Mom and Dad and inviting each other to weekly dinners. Mary Beth and Phil moved to the Midwest about a year after our divorce. Mike followed them out of town 6 months later. Good riddance. Assholes. Every single one of them. Lucy and her children are doing well. It took a while before she started dating, but once she jumped into the dating world, she became very popular among eligible bachelors. Lucy set very high standards for her gentleman friends and eventually found Mr. Right. They just celebrated their first anniversary. I guess, judging by the constant smile on each of their faces, that they still consider themselves newlyweds. Amy seems happy too. With the exception of a very tense relationship with Kate, most of her other relationships worked out. She's been dating a gentleman for 6 months now, and the last time I talked to her, she said he could be the one. I have my fingers crossed and hope she stays happy. And I'm doing well too. I took Stacy's place as division president when she left for Dallas. My responsibilities are okay. 2 years after my divorce, I met a familiar face. My cousin Lucy Aggie and I attended our mutual friend's daughter's graduation party. We talked several times throughout the day, And as the older people started to leave the party, Aggie grabbed my hand and said, "Let's go somewhere for a drink." I admit that Aggie can be a little insatiable. As a man over 50 who has sex 2 or 3 times a day, this is all I can offer my fiancé. Luckily, Aggie doesn't seem to mind. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.